Hello USMJ friends, we're going to check out a whole bunch of names here, 15 of them. We're going to look at the weekly time frame and zoom in from there. And I'm noticing just in the initial pass through of these names compared to the Canadian MJ names, there are some names that have been consolidating a little bit more significantly on the weekly time frame. That being said, there's also names that have not consolidated like GWPH here. So there's a little bit of everything similar to the Canadian MJ space where there's a whole bunch of different setups all within the same sector. So again, the premise where we have the S&P 500 still extremely strong, closing up at its highs, 10 weeks in a row of strength on its bounce, and the ideal operating environment for these bulls to thrive. And that's, some of these names we're going to look at, GWPH and IIPR, notably, the bottom was the bottom where SPY hit, and then obviously this bounce is with follow through and correlation to SPY. So GWPH had a bullish reaction to earnings, and we have a double top at the all-time high to be watching. 179.65 is that level. We topped out at 179.62, so literally a double top. But we're right there, and the bulls are going to be trying next week for all-time high continuation. You can see that we have strength where we have a gap to the downside, but we are maintaining the hourly uptrend since we've had that reaction. So we can see we had our high, our low of the pullback, higher low, and here we are on Friday heading up towards this resistance level. So the most important support is 170.74 for the bulls to keep the hourly higher lows in their favor. And then that resistance, if we can get over 180 psychological, the only resistances are psychological levels. So we'll look up at 185 and 190 from there. IIPR, same thing in terms of the last 10 weeks, all bulls, and they were positioned so well in the strength on the weekly time frame. Didn't see as much SPY correlation to the downside, but certainly seeing it back up, increasing huge bull volume, getting added to the S&P 600 small caps was a big boost in volume as well, and you could see that over the last couple of weeks. So all-time highs, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks in a row, we've been in blue sky breakout. And on the daily time frame, we can see the most recent leg up. We're topping out a little bit, and we have to form another higher low on the daily. Short-term support is 73.77, but really anything above $64 is going to be a support level that's still healthy for me on the daily chart. So this is one of those names that's under the radar. You don't see a lot of people talking about this. It was the first ever NYSE IPO in the MJ industry. They're an REIT. They pay dividends when market shows weakness, when the S&P 500 shows weakness. REITs generally hold up better, and that's because they issue dividends. It's a little bit of a safe haven. So this is a very well-performing stock, but if not in at this point, probably want to wait for a weekly higher low to be established as things are so overextended. CURA on the weekly time frame. So we did get that little continuation move. Certainly not a cup and handle pattern. So the setup was there, but we need a lot more follow through in a lot more convincing of a manner in order to head back up there. Keeping in mind, we also have, earnings are going to continue March through April. So depending on which names you're interested in, keep an eye out on when those earnings are approaching. So for CURA, the daily chart is pulling back now. The higher low is 950, and you can see the resistance level that we broke, 1068. We didn't get any follow through. We rejected from it and closed lower than we opened the 2 days we attempted to see that break. So at this point, we're going to see if the bulls can hold 950. And as long as we can, stay in this channel or even looking at the weekly time frame, we can still consolidate and still be healthy at this point. So there's no red flags. The only red flag is the short-term lack of follow-through that the bulls were unable to see on that, breakout attempt. But in terms of the consolidation that we may see here, it's still extremely healthy compared to where we stand with that all-time high right there. GTII, so the weekly time frame here, we got the higher low and then higher high follow through, and now we're consolidating again on the weekly. So anything over 1460 maintains the weekly uptrend and keeps those higher lows intact. The daily time frame, significant pullback, and what stands out to me is the increasing bear volume here. Look at on the way up. Every time we consolidated, it was on declining bear volume, and then we saw continuation on increasing bull volume. Well, now we have increasing bear volume, which does stand out. And we're looking at 1771 as a support level. Hourly RSI getting down towards oversold. So if we see another red day on Monday, that hourly RSI will be getting into those oversold conditions. And at this point, again, I'm cautious in everything in the sector because I want to see SPY consolidate on the weekly. I'll be a lot more comfortable with these weekly charts once we do see that SPY consolidation and see how it affects this sector. But if we can hold 1771 support on GTII, we have to be cautious of the head and shoulders pattern, where if we hold that support and we bounce and set a lower high, and then we have a neckline down at the 1771 area, which would indicate a change in trend if that were to play out. So first things first, we'll see if the bulls can hold 1771 on Monday, and if they can, we'll look for that lower high on the bounce attempt. TRUL, big bearish candlestick on the weekly time frame. We saw a lot of profit taking this week on TRUL, but we're still in a daily uptrend, and we had some people playing the oversold bounce on Friday. 1536 was the level to hold to keep the daily uptrend, and this is one of those scenarios where, just like Cron and CGC gave us those really nice entries recently, with hourly oversold conditions heading to key daily support, we have the hourly RSI and oversold conditions heading to key daily support yet again. So that hourly RSI is hovering just under 30 in all of Friday's trading, and then the bounce at the end of the day started to see things shift. 1632 and 1669 are the first two resistances that the bulls want to break on Friday, or I should say on Monday. And you can see the high volume candlestick here signaling the bottom, perhaps a little volume climax as we had the bears push it down. And then we had the bulls buy that dip, and that's where that volume's coming from. The question is, can we change the hourly trend to form just another daily higher low? If we do, because of the size of this pullback from the recent high, we will be looking for a lower high to be set on the bounce attempt. But first things first, we have to change that hourly trend. And if we don't, we'll still be watching key 1536 support and the hourly RSI, which is pretty beat up. GGB, weekly uptrend is close to being lost. So we have our high of 640, the low of the pullback is 470, our lower high was $6, and now we're close to setting that lower low. So it's all about 470 key support this coming week. If 470 breaks, 409 is the next support level. The daily time frame, you can see we are seeing weakness, and the daily RSI is going to be close to oversold if we do break 470 this coming week. And this is the kind of scenario where I would be a lot less interested in this ticker because there's so many other individual names that have weekly uptrends. And if we change the weekly trend here, that is going to clearly shift momentum. And with such a lack of previous price history, as it hasn't been trading so long, we know that, we could see a move back down to the $2-3 range. So definitely want to be cautious on this name and 470 support. And anything on the daily time frame under 547 will be just another lower high. MRMD also has been pulling back on the weekly time frame for 5 weeks at this point. So we have other names that haven't even really seen, we look at GWPH and IIPR. They haven't consolidated in the last 10 weeks. Here we are with MRMD with 5 weeks in a row of consolidation with a completely different standing. So I'm watching this broader, longer term equilibrium setup. Let's see what it looks like on the monthly chart. Probably too condensed. No, it's not bad. So we got the high, low, lower high, and we're now looking for the monthly higher low. We have multiple monthly inside bars forming, but we're looking for the higher low to form compared to 235. So this on the weekly time frame is a longer term perspective to be watching. And if I say to myself, okay, the most likely scenario is that we're going to form a higher low compared to 235, that means on the daily time frame, I'm watching for the trend change. And here's a scenario where if we hold 350 and then turn around and break $4, we change the trend. So that is a possibility to be watching for the bulls to give us the weekly higher low. And of course, if we break 350, that means take a step back, and we're going to be looking in the low $3, upper $2 range for that weekly higher low to be developed. So two scenarios. Bulls hold 350 and break $4 and change the trend to continue tightening up that monthly equilibrium, or break 350 support, and that would have me interested because the closer we get to this 235 support, the better the risk to reward in a play based off of that support. So MRMD does have my attention in the coming weeks, and I've never really focused any attention on this name before, but I do like the clarity of the longer term setup. So I am going to keep an eye and see if there is an entry that I like in the shorter term. And looking at the hourly RSI, so I can say to myself, we know 350 is the key support approaching, and if Monday, let's say we see further downside and the hourly RSI gets into the 20s heading towards 350 support, that's the kind of risk to reward scenario from an hourly oversold bounce off of a daily support that I enjoy. HARV, weekly consolidation clearly underway. We know a weekly higher low is going to form compared to 657, so worth watching for that weekly higher low. The daily time frame will have to change the trend back to the bulls in order for us to be confident. So we know that next time we bounce on the daily chart, it's just going to be a lower high compared to 1108. So we're not going to change this daily chart anytime soon in terms of the trend, but keep an eye out for when we do, because that's when we're going to look for the weekly higher low to be established and for a bit of follow through. So worth keeping an eye on this one as well. Lack of support where we currently stand, so it's a bit of a falling knife just in regards to not having a clear support level nearby to be basing trades or risk to reward scenarios off of, like we just did for MRMD. So this is the kind of scenario where I would, at a bare minimum, be waiting for an hourly trend change to look for the daily bounce to take place. Or if I were being even more patient, I would wait for the daily trend change to look for the weekly bounce and higher low to try and take place. OH, this is going to be a nice pattern to be watching in 2019 because of how, clear and long and drawn out that it is. So we had our high, low, lower high, and now we're scouting the higher low. And we do have a support level to be watching. That's down at 821. The bulls would love to hold 821. If the higher low is 821 and we don't break past that level, the odds are very favorable for all-time highs in 2019. If we break that level, then it's more likely to see an equilibrium. So that's the kind of scenario where the amount of pullback we get and the amount of percentage distance from a key resistance that we get, the more likely it is to an equilibrium. So if we hold here, continuation, a lot more likely. If we drop, then equilibrium and long drawn out pattern is a lot more likely. Checking it out on the daily time frame. So we can see 821 is that level, and the bulls bounced a bit at the end of the week without much follow through. So another scenario where I would watch 821, and if we get oversold conditions heading down to that support, I may be interested in a play off of it, but otherwise just going to be watching this channel on the weekly time frame. And this is the daily chart right now, but these are the levels from the weekly chart that we just picked out, and watching for a break of a tightening range within this channel, because if we break bullish, we're going to be looking back up at $9.90 and then $11, the all-time high. So similar to CURA, it's, we didn't get the bull follow through on CURA, but it is a very similar setup on their weekly time frames. Let's just look at them in comparison. Proximity to the all-time high, about 24% away for OH, and for CURA, we are about 14% away. So just similar in that regard. And because of that proximity, we are certainly not going to take our eyes off of it. MedMen, lower high on the weekly time frame, weak bounce attempt, bearish reaction to the inventory, or I should say to the earnings report. 360 and 311 are the support levels to be watching. And the daily chart tried to bounce on Friday and didn't get much follow through. When we do bounce, we're just going to look for a lower high compared to 447 to form on a bounce attempt. And we're heading back down towards that 360 level. So this is the kind of setup where I can say to myself very clearly, I am not interested in anything bullish about MedMen until we change this weekly trend and change this setup. Because right now, this is the weakest setup out of any Canadian or any USMJ name that we've looked at, and that's looking at 25 to 30 names. So that's very notable, and we have to see a shift in momentum. Again, it's the kind of thing where I don't care about the fundamentals. Yes, that revenue is great, and if you're a long-term fundamental trader, that's a completely different story. But I don't care if they're making $10 billion. If their chart looks like this, I have no interest in looking to play it bullish. And until that momentum shifts, then I will be interested again. KSHB on the weekly time frame has an equilibrium as well. 720 is resistance, 499 is support. Maybe our lower high at 649 is being set. If we follow through this coming week and break the low of last week, 585, then I would be a lot more confident saying our lower high is set and we're looking for the higher low compared to 499 to need to form. I don't like the clarity on the daily time frame. Pretty unclear for me. And when that's the case, I zoom out until I find something that is clear to me, and it is the weekly time frame, scouting for a higher low and a tightening range. CVSI, also extremely tight. And this is one where we have to be cautious because we got a bull break of a long drawn out equilibrium and a little bit of follow through. The break was 489 and we went up to 570. So certainly not complaining about the significant, 15% move, but we did not get follow through and we gave back a lot of that move at this point. If we break 451, we're looking at 405 And a break of 405 is a clear break of this pattern that would put the bears in full control. So 405 is the most important support level for me, but the bulls really want to hold 451 and shift momentum back up towards that 570 high. And if we look at the daily time frame, we can see we just have not been able to have the bulls put together any kind of meaningful momentum, and we have a lot of tops between 506 and 510. So there's a resistance zone in the low $5 range that rejected this little bounce attempt. And again, the weekly time frame for clarity here, and have to see the bulls get over those low $5 levels in order to be interested in this chart as a bull. NBEV. So NBEV lost this little weekly higher low, and that's not, the end of the world. We do have lower wicks the last couple of weeks, and I would be looking again at the longer term. For the monthly, it looks like an equilibrium is much more clear here, and this actually looks a lot like, oh man, who did we just look at on the monthly that was similar? Forgetting off the top of my head, but in terms of the equilibrium tightening up, we have the high, low the pullback. This may be our lower high, and we're watching for the higher low to form. And it's actually, I was thinking of KSHB on the weekly time frame. Looks pretty similar here to NBEV on the monthly time frame. So if we do end up pulling back and breaking 523, we're going to look for a higher low on the monthly in the $4 range, higher low compared to 303. And again, when I zoom out and look for clarity, I want tightening patterns that show me clarity. And then the breaks of those tightening patterns give us trend and give us, a new direction. So if we see a monthly pattern that's taking a year to tighten up and then it finally breaks, we can look for, multiple months of follow through in the break that does occur. So when you get these long drawn out monthly patterns, that can be very telling as to what to anticipate for the next bunch of months. So NBEV on the monthly is what I'm going to be watching in 2019. IAN finally got the shares converted on Fidelity, and in my opinion, that's leading to some of the extra downward pressure here. And we have other exchanges that have not had the conversion go through yet. So just be aware that the weekly chart is very due for consolidation. We have not consolidated the entire 10-week run inside bar this past week. So even if we pull back, we're going to look for a weekly higher low to form, and we're going to see if the bulls can maintain this support down here, 702 and 677. If we get a bounce, we're far enough away from resistance that we're going to anticipate a lower high compared to 806 is going to be set, and we have to watch for the potential of the head and shoulders pattern indicating weekly consolidation would be due if that's how it ends up topping out. So support, I would anticipate the bulls are likely to hold 677 support initially. The question is, do we bounce and then break it, or do we form an equilibrium with a solid bounce and see these bulls try and maintain to the weekly strength that we have been seeing? And again, I still have my IAN position and may exit I'm probably going to be basing my decision off what the S&P 500 does and how the MJ sector responds to it. Because if the S&P 500 shows us that, 2 weeks, 3 weeks of consolidation are coming and the MJ sector clearly is pulling back with it, I might, exit and look to reload cheaper, but that remains to be seen. And we'll see if we can bounce after essentially we've been seeing 5-6 days of consolidation in a row, and we have to change that hourly trend and see a break of 735 for any kind of shift in momentum. CWEB looking for this weekly higher low to form after shares became free trading, coming off the all-time high. And if we can change this daily trend for the bulls, then we will be confident that the weekly higher low has been established. So the bulls have a lot of space to work with. Anything above 1751 is a higher low, and then we'll need to break the lower highs, and that would give us the weekly higher low. And that's a pretty healthy weekly consolidation period there after the massive bull run into blue sky that we did see. So inside bar on the weekly time frame, we're going to look for a break of that this coming week. And this is another scenario where it's similar to MRMD. And if you notice how my brain's working, where I'm looking at these charts and noticing similar setups and saying, okay, this name looks like this name, and that's pattern recognition, and that's, allowing me to categorize who I want to be watching, because MRMD is a similar daily setup where we're looking for the higher low and then potential trend change to give us that weekly new support level. And now it's the same thing on CWEB. So we're probably right here where CWEB is at, where we're looking for the higher low and then the trend change. So if we drop down closer to 1751 support and I look to make an entry and utilize 1751 as my stop level and then see if the bulls can head back up and change that trend. And that's a similar setup to what's a potential play for MRMD this week based off of 350 support. And we'll wrap it up here with CL. Looks like that's not the right ticker. So CL is coming off of all-time highs, and anything above 848 is a high or low on the weekly, so we know that's very likely for the bulls to maintain. The daily time frame also still very strong. We hit a new all-time high on Friday, but it was a profit-taking candlestick with a spike in volume. So if we break 1155 this coming week, we know consolidation is underway, and it's certainly overdue, so it wouldn't be any kind of major red flag, and we would be watching for the potential of an entry, perhaps hourly oversold conditions. As we know, after a massive bull run, specifically all-time highs, the first hourly oversold bounce usually gets really nice follow-through. And you can look back here historically, that's been the case. We haven't really gotten too oversold on the hourly for CL. We're not close to oversold right now, but if we break 1155 this week, we will be getting towards oversold conditions. VFF has had some really great hourly oversold bounces on its all-time high blue sky run. So worth paying attention to in that regard. So what would I do with all these names? It's a lot to, try and keep track of. I would write down my favorite setups, which for me, with support approaching, would be MRMD and CWEB on their daily timeframes. I would write those names down. I would have a longer term list that I would be watching, and I'd write down the monthly equilibrium patterns that we were looking at, and I would write down to keep an eye out for CL hourly oversold. And that doesn't mean I have to be watching CL every day of the week. That just means, hey, once a week, maybe 11 a.m. each day, or once a day, I should say, check in on CL, see what the hourly RSI is, and as it starts to approach oversold, if it starts to approach oversold, to start getting ready for the potential of a bounce play. So can't stress enough writing things down in front of you. It helps you stay organized, it helps you remember things, and it's a good way to stay on task. Thanks again. Hope you do good things out there. Going to save chapter 2 of the road trip story for tomorrow so we can have the other videos catch up and not get ahead. And I hope you all have a great rest of your weekend, Sunday night. We'll wrap it up here with story time. I'm going to kick it off with a road trip that I went on. And just to set the stage before we get into it, let's see. At this point in time, I started off with my road tripping career when I was in college, and I watched the movie, oh man, what's it called? Into the Wild. So I watched Into the Wild, and as soon as I saw it, I said, all right, we're going to Yellowstone. I'm trying to adventure. And so with my college buddies, we drove to Yellowstone 36 hours straight to the Badlands in South Dakota, and then to the Yellowstone, and we went out into the bush for 10 days backcountry camping. We had no idea what we were doing in terms of supplies to bring, and we were starved without food out in the backcountry. It was a huge learning experience, and we had such insufficient gear. It was comical looking back upon it, but we were pretty miserable and hungry, sustaining ourselves with ramen noodles after hiking 10 miles a day for 100 miles. So that was fun. After that, I went on a road trip with my buddies after graduating college. I took 2 of them, and we were going around the country to all the national parks. Found out about 2 weeks before the trip that neither of them had ever been camping. So I was pretty much the leader of that excursion and did all the planning and all the driving, and we took my Honda Civic out there. And after that, I had a great experience with them. It was a ton of fun, but there were a lot of times where I was sitting there saying, man, I wish I were by myself, because I would wake up early. I'd be up with the sun, and they'd sleep 2 or 3 hours after that, so I'd have to just be bumming around the campsite waiting for them, when in reality, I wanted to be up and going and on with my day. So definitely appreciated the camaraderie and company and fun that we had, but I wanted to do my own, so I set out on my own many-month road trip around the country in my Honda Civic, living out of my car, and I was also doing it on a budget. So I'm a minimalist at heart. My whole life, I always have been conservative with money, conservative with resources, and so I had a game plan of, I'm just going to try and live out of my car and do this adventure with as much money as I'd be spending on rent. And I had saved up at that point in my trading career. I had success in the U.S. marijuana penny stock market, and I had saved up enough, maybe $20,000, that I was comfortable to know that I could, travel around for a year and figure some things out and have some fun before I looked at the job world and looked at making money. And at that point, I didn't think I was going to be a full-time trader my whole life. I hadn't gotten to that point. I had some successful swing trading, and I traded a little bit while I was on my road trip by myself. Not a whole lot, but just some swing trades. There would be times where I wouldn't have internet for a whole week, so I would do some swing trading. And there were times where I would be, put in one place for a couple weeks visiting a friend or something, and that would allow me to do some trading as well. But overall, I was slowing way down on trading and just looking to do some adventuring. So started it off let's go with, that's what my life was. That was everything that I owned that I would put in my car and had all the essentials. I had a big tent that I grew up with. This was like a 6-person party tent. I had a 4-person tent that I would bust out when I was camping out of my car. And then I had a 1-person tent that was really light for when I was backcountry camping. I had all my rain gear, and this was my sleeping mat, which part of being a minimalist, I made tons of mistakes in terms of, skimping on my gear. This army pad is like $8. It's this thick. You might as well be sleeping on the ground. It did nothing. And I said, all right, now I need to buy a $100 sleeping mat after this experience, because I was just miserable and it wasn't worth it. There are some things that money is worth being spent on, and a sleeping mat is definitely one of them. So that was another lesson that I learned. So that was what I left with in my car. Didn't have much else room, and because the Honda Civic's very small, it was completely filled up. I started on the East Coast in North Carolina in the Smoky Mountains, pretty close to where I'm living right now. And that's why they call them the Smoky Mountains, because the elevation has the clouds rolling right through them. And it's an awesome national park. And I got to learn a lot about these national parks in terms of their, rules and regulations. Some of them, like Shenandoah Valley in Virginia, is extremely friendly to campers. You get a permit and it pretty much says, don't camp within 100 feet of a road, 100 feet of a trail. And other than that, you can go wherever you want and sleep wherever you want. And I like that because there's so many times where I'm hiking and I'm just walking by a spot and I'm like, oh, that's the spot. I want to camp there. And oftentimes, it's not where your permit designates that you're supposed to go or things like that. So in Smoky Mountain, it's not the best camping. They have one designated campsite for developed camping, and it gets really crowded with a ton of people. And other than that, there's a lot of surrounding areas of national forests, and national forests are a lot more liberal with their rules, and you can pretty much pull off and backcountry camp wherever. There's very little regulation in that regard. So I generally would do that and then, go and hike inside the park, but not really camping in the park. But in this instance, I was. So night 1 of the road trip, setting off on this excursion, and I was heading out to my campsite a little bit late in the afternoon and close to the evening, actually. I was in a bit of a hurry. So got into the trail, started hiking. I think I had maybe 1.5 miles, 2 miles to get to my campsite. Got about a third of the way there, and it just started downpouring. And, I had some rain gear, but this is the kind of downpour that no matter what, everything's going to be soaked, and you're going to have to set up your tent, and your tent's going to be soaked, and your sleeping bag's going to be soaked. And so I just turned around and walked back to my car, took off all my clothes, got naked in my car, and just sat there for a while and started to have the doubts, what am I doing? Is this, what I'm about to do this for a couple months. Can I even do this? Just, all those negative thoughts that just started building, and certainly on the back of having my night number 1 completely ruined in terms of what I was planning on, and it being pretty much, one of the worst case scenarios of comfortability for that night. So with all that doubt, honestly, I took a hit of ganja and I put on some music, and I've never experienced a more significant, impactful 180-degree turnaround of emotions. Generally, fortunately, I don't really have those negative feelings. I have a very happy life that I'm very grateful for, but in this instance, it was just like, whoa, I can't wait. This is so exciting. Everything is perfect. I couldn't be happier. And that I will always remember for how notable the complete turnaround in mental state was with just those 2 little combinations. And I think it was either listening to Pink Floyd and Jimi Hendrix when it happened as well. Very notable. I wrote that down somewhere. I also took notes and dream journal. That's another thing. With the part of this trip that I was doing, a big goal I had was learning lucid dreaming. And I was already lucid dreaming at that point, but I just mean getting really good at it and reading about it. So I brought multiple books with me, and I was keeping dream journals, and I was adjusting my sleep schedule to wake up really early in the morning and then go do something and break up my sleep cycle and then go back to sleep for an hour or two. And that's when you have the best lucid dreams. And I actually just had a lucid dream when I was napping an hour ago before making this video. But that was a good start. So I camped in the Smoky Mountain National Park for a couple nights after regaining my composure. And I've gone there in the summer, in the winter, maybe 3 or 4 times total. And I've never gone there without seeing elk. So there's elk all over. And they're just hanging out. They're used to people, very accustomed to it. And some nice fungi. What a lot of people don't know is that in Western North Carolina, it's a temperate rainforest. So it's extremely lush. They get a lot of water that, supplements all these plants. And there's tons of plant life. I want to say there's some kind of statistic like the most diverse plant life in the continental United States. I might be making that up, but it's something along those lines in terms of the variety of plant life. And if you've been to Western North Carolina in the summer, it blows you away with how lush everything is. And it does seem like a jungle. So here are some fungi getting all up on a tree. And one of my favorite parts about road tripping is water. Drinking, fresh sources. And this is a really easy filter that you just scoop up the water and hang it. And within 5 minutes, you have a gallon filled up of fresh mountain creek water. And obviously, the closer to the source, the closer into the top of the mountains you get it, the better it's going to be in terms of cleanliness. But that was something that I really started to appreciate, just fresh, clean water directly from the source. And that helped me feel really connected. So this entire road trip, we're going to go through all the states and all the national parks. And I took a bunch of pictures, not much video. But this entire road trip, in my opinion, shaped a lot of my psychology and personal everything about me that makes me a good trader. So I do think there are contributions to that. A lot of comfortability being alone. And it's almost to the point now where, I need space to be alone because I enjoy it so much. But that was definitely due to this road trip and so many months on the road being alone. And there were times where I would go, a couple weeks without having any interaction with people aside from, just in passing hellos. So let's see what else. Syncing up with the sun. So my entire rhythm changed with the sun, where I was waking up with the sun and going to sleep. If you're by yourself and it's nighttime and pitch black and you're out in the middle of the woods, there's not a whole lot to do. So I would generally go to sleep right as the sun was going down. So that would at times be, 8 o'clock, I'm asleep and I'm awake at a little after 5:30, just as the sky starts changing colors to get sunrise. And I loved that schedule. It felt really on point. Aside and drinking water from the source and waking up with the sun, I felt very connected to the land. And with all the hikes that I ended up doing, it was a wonderful experience that I will continue to share with you all. So thanks for tuning in. Hope you have a great rest of your weekend, and I will see you in tomorrow's video, and we'll take it from there. Do good things. Have a great Friday night. Gonna go see some Empire Strikes Brass funk, New Orleans style.